Now, the next gentleman on stage is somebody that you probably will not see at many conferences just like this one, okay? So, but you will see him here at Shift, all right? He very rarely makes those appearances across the world, but you'll find him here at Shift. We're very proud and very happy to have him again back at this conference here in Split. Put your hands together for the man from Mashable, Mr. Stan Schroeder.
Have you got color in your cheeks? Do you ever get that feel that you can't shift, the type that sticks around like bullets in your teeth?
Don't know if you heard Tom's excellent presentation, Tom from GitHub. At the very beginning, he said something really important. He said, I knew I was having a presentation tomorrow, so yesterday I skipped the drinking, I skipped the partying, and I went home early. I did not do that. I did not do those things, so, you know, we'll see how it goes today. So anyways, I'm Stan. I work for Mashable. I'm going to give you just a little bit of background because it ties into what I'll be speaking about later. So Mashable has been around for 10 years this summer, 10-year anniversary. And I've been working for Mashable in various editorial capacities for about 8 years. And the site has changed a lot over the years. It started as a Web 2.0 blog, which in today's terms would be very similar to a startup blog. You know, we wrote about all these web companies that are coming along and changing the way that we do things online, that we do business. And then a couple of years in, social media became this dominant force, which changed absolutely everything, you know, especially when it comes to how the media is disseminated and shared. So we kind of switched our focus to social media. And although technology and web startups and Web 2.0 were still a big part of our coverage, social media was the main focus. And in the last phase of Mashable, so to speak, in the last couple of years, we've expanded our focus even further, and now we follow a broad scope of topics, including politics, world news, entertainment, sports. We follow all of those things, and we still do follow web startups. We still do follow startups. We still do follow technology, and it's a very, very important thing, important part of what we do. But it's not the only thing we do. And I'm in this sort of unique position to be in this company when it was just about startups, and now it's a lot about a lot of other things. And I know how people pitched us back then, at the beginnings. I know how they pitch us now, and I know what we needed, you know, to turn a startup into a story 8 years ago, and I know what we need now. And these things have changed considerably, and I'll be talking a little bit about that. So, startups, they also changed a lot. The definition of startup had changed. The definition that I know is that startup is a young company with an unproven business model. And this is no longer true, right? Because every startup founder here, if you talk to a VC or any kind of funding entity, the first question, or one of the first questions you're going to have to answer is, what's your business model? And you're probably going to say something like, well, we want to get big fast, and then we're going to go freemium. Or, I don't know, we're going to be ad supported. But the thing with those business models is that they're all tried and tested. They're not new things anymore, because there have been thousands of companies which use these business models to become huge businesses. So what I'm trying to say is that startups are now no longer this romantic notion of, you know, two guys in a garage going sailing into the unknown and perhaps becoming the next Facebook or the next Google. It's a lot more structured. You have your startup accelerators, you have your hubs, you have startup conferences like this one, you have early stage VC funds, you have late stage funds, so you know all these things. But it's no longer such a buzzword. You know, just being in a startup was enough to be a story 10 years ago. It's no longer the case. Before I go on, I just want to make sure that you know that I don't hate startups. I love startups. I've built a startup, I've sold one, I've failed at a startup, so I think it's a great idea of turning an idea, a great way of turning an idea into reality. And I think that's a new definition. You don't have to go through the motion of joining a company, moving up the ranks, becoming some sort of decision maker, and then building a product. With a startup, you just jump right in and build your product, and everything else comes a little bit later. But what I am saying is that there's a lot of structure to it. We know how it works. It's no longer this buzzword, like a romantic thing that will immediately sell your story. You have to try harder. All right, so this leads us to the name of this presentation, which is Get Out of the Startup Bubble. And by bubble, I don't mean a valuation bubble or economic bubble. I mean that a lot of the people who enter this world of startups become enchanted with this, and all of these things that I mentioned, they think that everything they do is really, really cool and important. And you know, it is to them, it is to their co-workers, but maybe not to your audience, and maybe not to the media. Just, you know, having a round of funding may not be enough to sell a story. So what you should be focusing on are 4 things. I've got 3 things over there, but actually there are 4. So you got product, traction, buzz, and story. That's what your audience wants to know about, right? Product, that's simple. What's the thing that you're building? And you know, how's it affecting the world? Traction, that would be getting a lot of users, for example, in a short period of time. Maybe in the last 6 months, you reached the milestone of having like 1 million users. And if 1 million users are interested in your product, then that's also interesting to the media and to the other users and to your wider audience. Buzz, that's a little bit of a tricky one, because if you have buzz, you already have media attention, right? But sometimes it so happens that you get a lot of buzz out of nowhere, and then you have to use that attention to channel it into the things that are really important for you and your audience. A good example of a buzz-generating startup was Meerkat. You probably followed the entire thing as it unfolded at this year's South by Southwest conference. Suddenly, everybody's meerkatting you, right? So this video streaming thing has become huge overnight. And then Meerkat had a lot of media attention. It was their job to turn it into a cool story, or you know, to focus so that the media outlets and their audience know what Meerkat is about. Finally, you have the story. And that's the hardest thing to do, turn a product into a story. Some products don't need a story because they're so easy to sell that you don't have to, you know, invent a story. Like Rimac supercar, right? You have it, it's the car, it's beautiful, it goes very fast, it's a technological marvel, so you don't, you know, have to work hard to sell that story. But sometimes you have a product that's not so easy to sell. For example, let's say that you're building a network infrastructure product. If you talk about bandwidth and data, stuff like that, that's going to be interesting only to engineers, right? Most people won't know what you're talking about. But, for example, maybe your product enabled some people in a poor country in Africa to go online and build something that's awesome, and they wouldn't be able to build it without your product. That's the story. That's the thing that you need to sell to the media and to the audience. That's going to sell your product. It's very, very hard to do, to create a story. And if I knew how to create a story out of every startup, I'd be a very rich marketing guru, which I'm not. But you have to try to do that because that's the best way to reach, you know, to get media attention and to get attention from the audience. Before I go on, just a note that your audience is not the media. I am not important here. I am just a guy whose job is to find cool stuff online and turn it into news. You know, I find stories, I turn it into news. You want to talk to your audience, and those are the people who are gonna, you know, buy your product. The people who are gonna maybe not buy it, but share it, you know, like it on social media. You have to think: are these people interested in, you know, what I'm building, my product, my story, or are they interested in, you know, how I'm building it, like my rounds of funding or where I worked before, stuff like that. Sometimes it's cool to know, sometimes it's interesting, especially if it's for example, if you've been funded by a very, very well-known, you know, fund or VC. But most of the time, you should probably, you know, put that into the background. So, as I said, if you're pitching a media outlet, approaching a media in any way, and let's make a distinction here. There are media outlets who cover startups exclusively, or cover business, or cover web business, so that's different. I'm talking about media that's more mainstream, that covers a broad scope of topics. Probably not the first thing you should mention is valuations, funding, your number of employees, where you worked before, the size of your office. You might want to skip, and go to the actual product, traction, buzz, or story. This is cool to mention sometimes. Most of the time, it won't work with a mainstream media outlet. So timing, that's an easy concept. A lot of people get this wrong. I get a lot of emails which say, so we are, these two guys, we have a startup, we launched our product 6 months ago, and now we have a Series B funding round. And what I'm thinking is, you should have contacted me 6 months ago, right? The moment in which you had the product available, which your product became, available to go into the hands of your consumers, your audience, that's the moment in which you want to grab media attention. If that happened 6 months ago, and you're pitching me about your funding round, the chances of you being covered by us are significantly lower. Sometimes it does work. These are not like rules set in stone. And most of the time, you want to time it well. So, what's the best time to pitch? For example, you're launching your product in 2 weeks. That's a good time. Or maybe you just hit a very important milestone. You have 1 million active users. That would be a cool thing, to share with the media. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes. Maybe you have a great story. Something cool happened because somebody was using your product or service, and it became this viral thing or a very, very cool story. This is a good time to pitch. If you pitch me, telling me how you do the things you do, like funding rounds, valuations, things like that, the chances are lower because that's not what your audience is ultimately interested in. Some people are interested, but those people are a very narrow part of your audience. Most people don't care, how much money you got from a VC. Most people want to know, how is your product going to change their life? Okay, so this ties onto the last one. A lot of people send me an email, again, which says, look, we're building this cool thing. It's not ready for prime time yet. But, in 3 to 6 months, we're going to be launching. We just wanted you to know. And I say, okay, all right, that's cool. And I never hear from them again. I have no idea why this happens. I guess that people get discouraged. They think, okay, this guy didn't cover us the first time. He's never going to cover us. That's not necessarily true. Maybe you just really weren't ready, or maybe I wasn't interested at the time, but something changed. Maybe you have a cool update to your product, or maybe a cool story happened, or there's a lot of buzz around the field in which you're working in. So there could be significant changes, and you might want to pitch again. Don't get discouraged if your email or pitch or approach to a media outlet did not work the first time. Now, very important, this does not mean send me zillions of emails, because that's not going to work at all. But, don't get discouraged if I don't respond to your email first time. I chosen an example of MashMe, which is a company that I think many of you know. They were here present at ShiftSplit, I think, last year or the year before that. So they're, incubated by Zip. I know about these guys for a long time because I was mentoring them once upon a time. And I knew about them from the very beginning. And they have this cool concept. They don't have a product yet, but they have a cool concept. You can just, stand, wave your hands, do things with your face, and an animated character follows your movements. And you get like instant animation. So, that's a really cool concept, I thought. But everything else about the startup was very fuzzy. They had no idea what they want to do. They had no idea, are they going to build a product for a professional audience of people who are like animators, or are they going to be building some sort of YouTube plugin? So everything was fuzzy about it. I liked the concept. I thought this might be a cool thing one day, but at the beginning, and I saw them a couple of times over the years, it was never quite there. And a month ago, I think, or 2 months, they approached me and they had a Kickstarter coming. And they said, look, we've changed a lot of things, we've improved, here's what we've done. And I checked out their page, and absolutely everything that they did was way better than the first time I saw them. They had better presentation. They had better video. They had the concept was much clearer explained. They had, a lot of GIFs showing how this animation works. They had a better business model. They knew what they were building. And I thought, okay, this is a good time to write about these guys. So I wrote about them, and it was the article was significantly, well, it was doing pretty well. But another thing happened which shows the importance of timing. As soon as I published, like an hour later, a local TV station approached me and said, "We like what these guys are doing. We wanna do an interview with them." And when I say a local TV station, that's local for New York. So an audience of like 10 million people, not really local, in our terms. So it's a pretty big opportunity. But the TV station said, "We want to try the product. We actually want to try it out, see how it works." And I connected them to the MashMe guys, and they did the video. They tried the product. But maybe if I wrote about them 2 years ago, they wouldn't have the prototype, and they would not be able to take that opportunity. So this is how buzz works. You get some buzz, a little bit of buzz, and it gets going. But if you're not ready yet, if you're not there, if you don't have anything to show, then you might just waste the opportunity. So the last thing, creating a story, the hardest thing to do. When I prepared for this presentation, I contacted a friend, a colleague at Mashable who writes about startups a lot, and I said, give me an example of a startup that wasn't very interesting to begin with, but they had a cool story. So she pointed me to Pink Tank, which is basically an app that lets you add animations to photos and share them with your friends. So it's a lot like Snapchat. So you have this app that's basically a competitor, Snapchat, which is huge. So crowded space, big competitor, not that revolutionary or not that different from other apps out there. So not that interesting, right? But what they do is they promote their product in an unusual way. Founder has some Hollywood connections, and he throws these huge parties in which he invites celebrities, and he has this stunts done in which fake cops come in, put them in canned cups, carry them away. Then I don't know, Drake shows up, starts rapping. The cops leave him alone. It's all a stunt, a publicity stunt, but it's definitely a different way to promote your product. And I'm highlighting this example because that kind of story wouldn't work on me. First of all, I'm far away from Hollywood, but it's not the kind of story that resonates with me. But Carissa, my colleague, thought that was a very, very good, cool story, and she wrote a pretty long and informative article about that. And you can read it. It went out a week or so. So it goes on to show that sometimes you should try different avenues. What a story that doesn't work on one guy, maybe it's going to work on another person. The last thing I want to talk about, and the best story that I have, is Loud Evolution. It's a very, very, very old example, a couple of years old, but it's probably the best that I'm ever going to have in terms of this topic. So a friend of mine, Goran, who I knew for a number of years, approached me and sends me an email and says, look, I've got a story for Mashable. And I'm like, okay. And he says, I wrote a book, I wrote a novel. And the first thing I'm thinking, we don't exactly do book reviews at Mashable. We love books, we love literature. It's just not something that we do regularly. And I'm thinking there's no way that we're going to cover this because, however good the novel might be, we're probably just not going to cover it. But he says, wait, I have a good story. So what he did is, this is some sort of detective science fiction novel. He created the entire city in which the novel takes place, and he created it in Minecraft. So you could go and walk to the virtual streets of the city that takes place in the novel. And Minecraft was huge back then, so it was very, very cool thing to do. A lot of effort went into that. Another thing he did is create Twitter accounts for some of the characters in the novel. So you could go on Twitter and follow these guys, the characters from the novel, outside of the scope of the novel and see how the story progresses, on Twitter. So immediately when I saw that, I knew that this was a great story that we just have to have. Because it doesn't even matter if the book is good, the book can be crap, but the way to promote it is a story, and it's something that I've never seen before. And I didn't write the story. I sent it to a colleague in Mashable. She was delighted to see that the story, and she liked it very much. The article ended being called "The Future of Book Marketing," and I think it's a very, very good example of a story that shows how you can have something that would never be featured, on a media outlet, or very, very hard, to get it to be featured somewhere, and then you can have a good story and turn it into something that we just had to have. With this, I thank you. I don't know how much time we have. I think there's time for a couple of questions and answers. Before we go on, if you don't get your questions answered right now, you can catch me later. I'll be here all afternoon and in the evening, probably late up in the evening. So feel free to grab me, by the sleeve and ask me anything. Peter, let's have some Q's and A's.
Yeah, if there's anybody here who'd like to ask a question, just put your hand up and we'll give you the microphone for Stan.
No Q's? Everybody want to go to lunch? Let's give it a couple of more seconds. I don't see any hands.
Okay, if there's any questions, I'm sure at lunch this afternoon, approach Stan, talk to him, and he'll be able to do that. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Stan Schroeder from Mashable.